On the podcast today, we're going to speak about the wheel of samsara and reincarnation. A lot of people asked from last week, can we talk more about the wheel of samsara framework? And also, when we speak about that, we have to also speak about reincarnation. And we also have to speak about the jiva, right? We have to speak about the individual themselves or ourselves. Mm-hmm. So, for those who are unfamiliar with samsara, samsara is a concept in Hinduism and Buddhism that we find, and samsara is this cycle that we're all caught on, this life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth cycle.
They call it wheel of life.
The wheel of life, exactly. Yeah, so we're on this wheel, kind of like a hamster on a hamster in the wheel, right? We're on this treadmill of life. And we find ourselves caught in this wheel of samsara framework when we over-identify with our persona. That keeps us locked into this illusion of a separate reality that's bound to time. And if we're going to use Buddhist terminology, then nirvana is escaping the wheel of samsara. Nirvana is a recognition of the eternal, actually. It's a coming back into an abidance within that infinite reality, that one reality. You know, one is a bad term because one implies two, but that non-dual reality. And so that's basically what nirvana is. So it's a recognition of that, and that's a way of kind of, in a sense, jumping off the wheel of samsara. Easier said than done, right? You can't just say that and theorize about that, and that is going to happen. You know, that's not quite how Eastern spirituality works, because there has to be a lot of self-observation. There has to be self-work done on a deep level, shadow work, all sorts of work done on yourself to come to those higher states of consciousness.
And I think you have to have a bit of a belief in this kind of concept, because a lot of people have this idea of life. It's just a linear form of life. Mm-hmm. Like you just live once, and once you die, you go to either heaven or hell, or this kind of concept of life, which is, I mean, predominantly from Christianity. Yeah. And a lot of people don't believe in reincarnation, but to practice the Eastern wisdom tradition, you need to have a belief in concept like reincarnation. Not exactly, doesn't have to be reincarnation, I don't think, but if you have a belief of like life as in this is not just once, there must be something more after you die kind of idea, then I guess you're on a right track.
100%. Well, that's, again, a big difference, again, between Eastern and Western spirituality, right? Like there's the many lives theory of the East, and there's a one linear life of the West. So the East are speaking about a cyclical reality. They talk about time cyclically with the yugas. Everything's a cycle. So everything is a function of nature. So nature itself is cyclical, and so they project that onto consciousness and everything itself, time, and so forth and so on. We have an illusion of experiencing reality linearly. So that, from an Eastern perspective, if they were to look at Western religions, they would say that they've just been duped into thinking that life is linear. So you're born and then you die, and there's just one de facto life. And that's not the way it is. There's many lives, and like you said, but there has to be a belief in that many lives theory. And many individuals have taken that to its nth degree, right? So we have like the great yogis of the past and the rishis, and we even have the Tibetan monks, and even if we go over into Egypt, they took this seriously as well. So, yeah, best example is obviously in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where the practitioners would actually go into the death state, and then to explore the nature of that, and then to come back. And so there were these three levels in what they explain, the monks in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, not just Buddhist monks, but also like people in Bon, the traditional shamanism of Tibet, where they would go through these three stages. And the first stages is what they explain is when we die, you go into this stage where you're in the complete non-dual reality. So you get a glimpse. You're in that. And like they say, it's hard. You can't describe that. A lot of people call it, as in the Tao Te Ching, the darkness within darkness, or there's all of these things. Or other people think about it as some sort of light, but they say get out of that sort of ideas, because that's obviously visually oriented. This is a completely different reality, probably beyond vision or sound or all sorts of sense. It's beyond the senses, right? So you go into that realm, that non-dual realm, that the source of all of our existence, the whole universe. We can't really describe that, can't give it a name. And then what happens then is, if your karma is strong, if your jiva is strong, your persona, then that itself is a vibration. And so you'll sense that, and then as soon as you sense that karma sort of wane on you, you go to the second stage, which is kind of like, not really, but sort of like purgatory, where you're kind of in this realm where if you can bring your mind back to that reality, that stillness, you still have a chance of going back into the non-dual source realm. But then if it intensifies, then you go into this third realm where the vibrations are very strong. It's very hard to get yourself out of that place. And then they say when you're in that realm, then you get sucked back into a womb, So
then coming back to this world
again, yes.
Yeah.
In whatever form.
Yeah.
They're not saying particularly human, but whatever form it is. You will experience it as a form of consciousness, whatever that will be, So they explain that, you know what I mean? And the Egyptians speak about similar things, and obviously the yogis and the rishis and that speak about a similar reality too. It's all explained differently using different languages and so forth and so on. But the technology that had developed from that, and what I mean by technology is the inner technology, is this kind of wheel of samsara framework that we have, that in general most of the traditions use. You'll see samskaras, vasanas, and karma almost across the board in most Indian traditions.
Yes. It's quite interesting that in Korea, and not just in Korea, I guess it's many Eastern nations which follows Buddhism strictly, they, like after someone's death, right, they kind of give respect for that individual's death for 49 days. And that this doesn't get practiced by everybody. It just sticks strictly for people who follow Buddhism. And these people believe that when they give respect for 49 days, the process of the 3 steps they go through after death is being guided by their respect and worshipping and love that they give to that person will help them to liberate the spirit of that being, and then eventually will help to free the spirit so that not to kind of come back. Again, I didn't really know when I was younger that so many people are doing the 49 days paying respect. Because my family doesn't follow Buddhism, so my family doesn't have that sort of tradition in the family. So I wasn't very aware of it. But then when we come across the Tibetan Buddhist, how they do the ceremonies of death and things like that, and then it comes up that 49 days, that something kind of triggered in my mind, and that must be something related to what I saw when I was a child, It's quite interesting that they actually have the actual days that they pay respect for the dead, and to free the spirit eventually. That's quite interesting.
It's really interesting, because they also say that experience that I spoke about with the 3 stages, though they say if one of us are experiencing it, it may seem like some sort of moment outside of time, but they would say it is around that 49-day period. So for, because we are in time here as humans, but in that realm, it's beyond time and space. So but it's kind of like, Interstellar, when Matthew McConaughey went to that planet and he's there for only a few minutes, but on Earth, it's like
For like 50 years.
50 years.
Or something like that, yeah.
So that's kind of what we're talking about. It's outside of that spectrum, and they would say it is 49 days. And it's interesting because some Buddhist traditions believe that the Buddha meditated for 49 days under the Bodhi tree. So you have this recurring 49, this number.
There is some like a mathematical reason why behind it,
Yeah.
but definitely it's quite interesting.
It is interesting, yeah. And so you see that. As you know, some, also on the other spectrum, some Buddhist traditions think that he just meditated one night under the Bodhi tree, and which is kind of more of the accepted view, because I guess meditating and sitting in one posture for 49 days, you're leaning more into mythology there. You're not leaning into that the Buddha was a real historical figure. Nevertheless, what we're talking about is that process. So, and like you said, like in the Buddhist tradition, when you do say farewell to a loved one, you have that 49 days of not even really grieving. It's like you said, you're trying to elevate that spirit out of that realm, out of that karmic field that they may be stuck in. So you're sending, good energy, positive vibrations towards that being to try and elevate them out of that sphere. And it's a lovely tradition, actually, and also maybe true. I mean, too, because like if we look at especially the Tibetan or the yogic or the rishi perspective of this realm, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, like for that being who is going through the process may experience that it's like just like going for like 5 seconds or something, but for Earth time, 49 days, and just like when we dream at night, right?
Exactly.
Like you dream of something and it goes so fast, but it's already the morning. It's a little bit like that.
Like a 2-minute dream and it's 8 hours.
Yeah.
Well, it
exactly.
appears a 2-minute dream.
Yeah. It's very interesting realm when you stay away from this version of time and space. Then you go through a completely different system of time where you don't even feel there is such thing.
Yeah. And that's what happens when you go beyond those sorts of time-bound karmic effects. You're seeing, like, so when you go into that non-dual realm, you're beyond time, beyond space, beyond matter, you're beyond everything. So your whatever it is experiences that reality the way it truly is, where we're experiencing a version of reality which is time-bound, bound to space, bound to matter, right? And so it's a limited version of reality. But what we are talking about here today is, that beyond that samsara is that place, is that infinite reality, which actually, according to the traditions, is actually within samsara as we speak. But it's a matter of perception, and it's a matter of overcoming the Wheel of Samsara framework, which we spoke a little bit about last week, but we'll speak more about today. So, which makes up the persona, makes up the jiva.
Yeah, that's, I think, very important point that you mentioned perspective.
Yeah.
When you have belief in that Wheel of Samsara this framework, your perception towards your own life is completely changed. Rather than thinking of life as a linear and just you live once and you die and that's it type of thinking. Yeah. It gives you completely different outlook to life, and you give a different meaning and purpose in life, so to say. So, whether that's real or not, that's not up for debate. It's just what that concept wisdom tradition gives us is that that perspective, how the outlook of life, that what changes completely.
Well, you raise a good point, because the thing is that what we see in the world now, especially through entrepreneurship and people who are motivational speakers, which is a Western phenomenon, it's all built on you should use this life well because this is your only life. So you get to work, so to speak. But if you look at it from, like, if we're in India, you got time. You got time. Not this life, maybe the next. It's okay. Chill.
Yeah.
You see? And it takes out individuality too. Because, see, heightened individuality comes from a single life theory. So that this is this only life. Whereas when you go to India, why a lot of people are shanti in India and why a lot of people are very present and, well, there's a lot of chaos going on, but when you know Indians personally and they're very calm and they have a certain grace and way of doing things, that's based on the many life theory. Like, if I don't get it done this life, it's okay. There's many to come. You know what I mean? Like, why start this project now when I can do it my next life? and most of us in the West are like rushing around to start the project on Monday or Tuesday and wanting to finish it by Friday, and they're like, Shanti, don't worry about it. We can do it next week, next life, don't matter. So that adds a sense of calm to your life too, that a lot of Western people don't experience. And so, that's a big thing, especially in the world now. As you know, with entrepreneurship so high, you have a lot of motivational speakers telling people, use this life well. They're trying to motivate you to... And there's actually nothing wrong with that, But from an Eastern perspective, what's the hurry? And also, don't get too far ahead of yourself that if you do achieve all of these things that you're going to achieve, that's going to first lead to happiness, and that's going to be all there is on your journey, so to speak, because, the next life, how much karma did you accumulate in trying to achieve those goals and so forth and so on? How many samskaras do you have embedded in your subconscious? There's so many things to talk about, right? So,
yeah, again, in that realm, all comes down to your self-interested way of thinking, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Like, it's kind of interesting that to think that life is the only life, the single life theory, can kind of motivate you even more to walk on strict spiritual path in a way. But if you were to think that you need to achieve something to be, I don't know, special, to be regarded yourself as a special person by other people and things like that, then obviously it wouldn't work that way. It's countereffective.
Well, if a Vedantist heard, say, a Western motivational entrepreneur speaker, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, sure, I better get into action," and because this is my last life. They look at it differently. Like we have to make this our last life, and that's also another thing within Eastern spirituality, right? Like your emphasis to make this your last life. So even if you saw it from a single life theory perspective, okay, if I only have this life, I better start my sadhana straight away.
I gotta get to work.
You got to get to work straight away. Like my sadhana should begin now. If you're listening to this, it should be beginning now. So that's what should be happening.
Well, I guess the motivation and intention behind it is completely different, then, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
That's what it is.
That's what it is. Yeah, exactly. So it's about coming. Yeah, so they're completely two different motivations.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
so one is about acquiring a material way of life that is affluent, and the other one is moksha. So it's completely different. But again, this raises a point, and also I have a video about this where about samsara, where a lot of people within, especially Buddhism, talk about, we leave it to next life. You know, I'm just accumulating good karma now, and so forth and so on. Whereas the higher elements of Eastern spirituality is make sure that this is your last life. You know, focus on your sadhana in this life and get rid of a lot of the attachments and desires and so forth and so on now. Don't wait till 2 lives' time, or, you know, if you have the thing is that, and this is the thing about the Wheel of Samsara framework, it doesn't matter if you want to believe you don't have a latent desire or you know, tendency. It doesn't matter if it's there. The universe knows what's going on, so you're going to come back to try and exhaust that desire. You know what I mean? So you have to really get to work, and you have to understand yourself at, like, to the bottom of your own being, because if that's lagging, it will be exposed. And so we have to talk then about the Willow Samsara framework. So as I mentioned last week, we have samskaras, vasanas, karma. This makes up the jiva, right? Jiva being the persona system, if we're to use psychological terms. And samskaras being the subconscious, being all of that storehouse that we've accumulated through our life, the conditioning, socialization, education, everything, right? Every imprint. You walk down the street, someone throws rubbish at you, that's going to be an imprint. Or even if someone's throwing rubbish at themselves, it's still going to be an imprint because you're going to have experienced that.
Anything that happens to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anything within the experience.
Leave the mark. Right?
Yeah, anything within the experiential realm. And so then that affects your vasanas, which is your latent tendencies and habitual ways. And those vasanas are what are the impulse for your karma, for your action, and your unconscious actions. So when you act unconsciously stupid, like sometimes, which we all do, like we might react to a situation which was not in our best interest and not in the best interest of the other person, that is just an unconscious karmic action that's been motivated by the habits and tendencies of vasanas, which has been fueled by a samskara, like that has not been exhausted. And so when we talk about the Wheel of Samsara framework, that is actually the Wheel of Samsara, because what you're doing there is that your samskaras are informing your vasanas, and your vasanas are informing your action, and then it has a reverse effect. You see, you act a certain way, and then that's going to
affect the
vasanas, and then it's going to create a samskara that's going to just sit there.
We are basically breaking that cycle.
We are attempting to break that cycle, yes, on the spiritual path.
Yeah.
And that breaks the total cycle of the wheel, for your being, of the Wheel of Samsara. Eventually, yeah. Because that's what you're doing. You're trying to exhaust, or you're trying to transform your samskaras so that your karma, when they say transcend your karma, what they mean is you're transcending that action that's based on the jiva. So in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, when Krishna says to Arjuna about nishkarma karma, which is similar to uwe, which is like acting without being attracted to the fruits of your action. So you basically just become an aperture for the Tao, or a limb of Shiva, to use that terminology, to act in the world. And so that's when you start to transcend your karma. But you can only get that there, like you said, when we reverse the cycle and we work on the samskara level, which then affects our vasanas, which are then our karma. Then we don't accumulate karma, because you can only accumulate karma when you're a jiva, when you're identified with the person.
So then once you break the wheel of samsara, you break the cycle, then you no longer exist as jiva.
Yeah, no more jiva. Jiva's dead. Actually, jiva never was. From the Vedic perspective, the jiva is the illusion of Maya. But you kind of keep reinforcing this illusion that you think you are, so to speak. So when you haven't exposed the jiva, then that's what continues to live life after life. But it's not Gayang as Gayang, it's the tendencies and the habits and all of the karmic stock that's been accumulated in your samskaras, which is kind of like an energy, right? It's like an energy base, and that energy base finds a particular womb that has the same sort of energy, no matter what race, creed, wealth, it doesn't matter. It'll find that particular energy base, or whatever being, based on that thing. So the Buddhists, like we were mentioning before, are kind of the people saying I'm trying to accumulate good karmic stock are not, in some sense, it's kind of cute, like they're not doing anything particularly wrong. But when people think of a good life and they think of coming back in a fortuitous life, they think of being wealthy, and so you have to go also beyond materialism. You can't be focused like that, because in some sense, if you were to come back in a good life, you'd probably come back into monkhood or, be a yogi, or if we're looking at it from an Eastern perspective, that would be more of a fortuitous life.
I think how people identify the reincarnation, what triggers reincarnation and having a good deed and whatnot, is based on creating good karma, but in a way try to be a very moral and righteous way, right?
Yeah.
And to be kind to others, and you act appropriately and help others when they need help, and just become trying to be a compassionate person, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's all well and good, but I don't know if that type of effort will go deep enough to tap into your samskaras. But I think what triggers that cycle keeps going is to have that samskara, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And changing your action actually literally have no direct connection to changing your samskaras, cleanse your samskaras, so to say. So I think we need to go much deeper than just creating good karmic stock.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on what you mean by changing your action. Like if you're changing your action just to be moral, then that you're still associated with a person. So you want the person's life in the next life to have a good life, whatever the individual deems as good. So probably for a lot of people, it's having a lot of wealth, having a lot of notoriety, respect. Obviously in the East, that's kind of a stupid way to look at it, because you should be dissolving the I. You shouldn't be trying to enhance the I. But this is where a lot of people get confused, because they think about, I'm just accumulating good karma. And then when you ask them, what do you mean by that? Because you expose their intention and their motivations. So their intentions and their motivations are materialistically driven.
And I think a lot of us are not quite aware of that far, I don't think.
No.
Because what society put in a good light is good, right? That's what most of us think, right? So that whatever perceived being moral and good and ethical are good, right? So that you want to follow that path without realizing deeper aspect of that, right?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because the thing is like, and I wanted to mention that to what you were mentioning before too, when you were mentioning action, is that the morality of society, the morality of your religion, the morality of any organized or constructed perspective has nothing to do with the transcending the Wheel of Samsara framework, because the nature has its own morality, but it's not. It has nothing to do with socialization. It does in a sense. For example, if we're killing someone, we naturally feel no good when we harm someone else. Not just killing, but if we harm someone else, we don't really. Well, there's a few psychopaths out there, but you know what I mean. In general, most people don't. And this lends into Mencius's philosophy, where he kind of introduced this natural morality that exists. So when he was explaining that everyone is fundamentally good, he used the boy beside the well analogy. So if we saw the boy fall in the well, what's that natural feeling we all have inside is to try and do whatever, and not even care about our own self-preservation. We're just doing whatever we can to save the boy. And that's a great illustration, because that shows us that we are fundamentally good, but it also shows that there's a natural morality. So when we think about accumulating good karma and so forth and so on, that's how we need to be thinking. We shouldn't be thinking as in just doing good deeds in society and having fake compassion and empathy for other people. It has to arise naturally. It has to be a natural experience, because in the end of the day, all of us being a part of this one energy that we call Tao or Brahman, it knows if you're if you're, if you're putting on a show or not.
I think the true act of real sense of right action is outcome of cleansing out the samskaras.
Mm. Yep.
Then that's the only way it can be authentic. Wouldn't it? You can't. Well, you can try to be kind and compassionate towards other people, of course, and of course we need to try to be that way consciously, but that also come from that also is the outcome of cleansing out our psychic, imprints.
Well, if someone was not, for example, if someone was not compassionate or not forgiving, then instantly if they started trying to practice that, that's a good thing for them. And then hopefully that would become a natural response, But we see a lot of people in the world who are still, it's very hypocritical. Like they may say that they give a lot of money to a charity and so forth and so on, and then you see their personal and actions and the way that when the things that they do in the world, a lot of we can look at rich people like that, right? They give a lot of money to charity, but then you see what they do to the environment, and you see they fund certain things that are detrimental to large populations in the world, and so it's very hypocritical and it's out of sync. So it's more, again, they are attached to a self-image. And so what I would say to what you're alluding to is that yes, it's good that if you don't have that about yourself, practice it, but don't be attached to like an image of yourself. And this is what's important about the nishkarma karma aspect, not being attached to the fruits of your own action, because when you practice that, then you are doing things just because that's what needs to be done. You're not doing it to take a photo on Instagram like you're feeding, giving food to a beggar and look what I'm doing, because you see this online. It's horrendous. You know what I mean? When you see people doing that, you're like, oh no, you're trying too hard. When you and I, we know hundreds of people who are out there, no social media, but they're just doing the right thing because that's what needs to be done. They don't have any glorified campaign behind themselves. They're just doing it of their own accord. They are being like what Mensch just said. They're just acting from that place. And that's hard actually to give to someone because we live in, especially in this day and age, because everyone's doing things for notoriety. Like I said, but the Instagram photo of giving food to beggars and stuff like this.
Yeah, we want recognition.
People want recognition. Look at me. Look how pious I am. And this again is a Western thing. Like, also tied to Christianity because Christianity has this very high pious attitude. And they base everything on this very pious attitude. That's why they look at Eastern spirituality as it's evil or something like this, because Eastern spirituality is very hard to figure out, and it can have darker elements and this and that because you need to explore the darker elements of the psyche. When you have this shiny veneer, beneath that there's it's toxic, So that's what we have to center on, is we have to come back to that spiritual process of the Willow Samskara framework to get rid of all of that fakeness, that falsity and hypocrisy that most of us have.
It's a huge task. Like you said, there's samskara itself has a certain element of the energy, certain quality of that energy, so that to transcend that quality, it'll take a lot of work.
Yeah,
right?
of course. It's not just going to happen overnight. Again, like we alluded to a little bit about it last week, but like you need to apply the tools that actually help transform the samskaras. And now when we talk about the wheel of samsara tools to affect the samskaras, we have to look at viveka and vairagya. So viveka is discernment, so a constant observation of what is real and what is not real. Now, from that perspective, what is real is Brahman. It's just the ultimate reality. There's only one reality. What is unreal is the jiva, who thinks that there's a dualistic world.
Maya.
Yeah. And so when you think that, you're constantly self-interested and constantly in a state of self-preservation. So that's a state of evolution that, was beneficial thousands of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, not beneficial no more, because we're at such a developed state now that we can contemplate the nature of the universe and we can live in harmony with one another. We live in that great opportunity at the moment, but we're squandering that because we're still connected to those evolutionary energies of self-interest and self-preservation. And so when we apply viveka, then you're constantly, you're in a discernment thing, but what enhances that also is the vairagya aspect, the dispassion towards the world, the non-reactiveness. And what that does is it has an effect on your action. So what you're trying to do there is not change your actions to be pious or moral, you're just ceasing action. You know what I mean? So if you said something to me that, evoked a samskara or a vasana, then when I feel that intense energy to act in a certain way, I just withdraw. I just go, no. This is what pratyahara is, right? The withdrawal of the senses. So that sensation, that feeling, I just like, no, I'm not. I'll let the fire burn inside. And see, a lot of people, especially in psychology, say, but you need to express yourself sometimes and this and that. Sometimes, but not all the time. If someone says something to you that evokes a certain sensation, like if it evokes a vasana, like an intense vasana where it's like burning on the inside, that's more so a problem with you than the other person. The other person can be an idiot, for sure, but what they say shouldn't actually evoke an old samskara, because we spoke about this many times on the podcast. Our samskaras identify with situations, but it's not always correct. It intuits a situation that it thinks is exactly the same as a past.
What happened in the past.
And they're all different. Each and every situation is different. If we look at it on a micro level in detail, they're all different. But it senses a certain event, and then it acts accordingly. So you said something to me, and I'm just, what the hell are you talking about, and this and that. Where if I just observed it and let the fire burn, as the great teachers say, this is slowly, like you're slowly turning the screws in the heart of the ego. You're slowly killing the ego.
Do you think that samskara also could be from your personality or temperament? Not necessarily from just experience of things?
Yeah, of course. But what the East will say is what makes up the personality and temperament. Right. So you got to look at genetics, you got to look at your conditioning.
Then we are going way far back when we were newborn babies.
When we were newborn babies,
right?
exactly.
How did we raised when we were completely unconscious, when we had no faculty of being conscious, right?
Well, there's scientific research that suggests that from 0 to 4, and that's a generalization. It could be older or younger for particular biologies, but your subconscious is completely on. So there has been research that someone has a sense of trauma in their life and they don't know where it's from, but it was from when they were in that infant period, which is crazy when you think about it, right? So if you had experienced physical abuse as an infant, you don't know anything about it when you become fully conscious as you get older.
But whatever happens to you, something triggers.
Yeah. That's a samskara.
That's why it's so difficult. You try to go as far as you can, but there are still something left right at the bottom.
Well, yogis try to go back into past life samskaras.
Well, that's right. That's right.
They don't just want to just do it. That's what happened in my infancy. But what happened
before that? Yeah.
So you're getting to a really heightened level.
And
there.
one before that.
One before that, yeah. What was I like in my infancy and my fourth life in the past?
Yeah.
So
This is my 11th lifetime. And rah, rah.
So we're getting way out there.
Yeah.
But yeah, you raise a good point, because I think that the argument from psychology would be, but don't we have personality traits that would lend to samskaras? And yeah, for sure, there's personality types, right? But a personality type is not really linked. Well, I shouldn't say not really linked, but generally it's not linked to samskara, because your personality type kind of is just the way you are in this form, right? But there can be different personality types, but they can still be peaceful personality types, but they act a certain way in this life, right? Or they have certain tendencies. But tendencies again are temperaments, are linked to more so vasanas, temperaments. So you have, for example, your father may have a short temper. You're likely going to have a remnant of that short temper. Maybe not exactly like your father, but that is kind of a genetic samskara. You see, it's a genetic samskara. But from the Eastern perspective, they say it doesn't matter. Like, all samskaras can be dissolved or transformed or resolved. But we're not really splitting hairs, but we're getting deeper into the discussion, I guess. But it is difficult, because the thing is that we have to look at it in context too. Like, so if we look at the rishis and we look at the yogis, or even the Tibetans thousands of years ago, there was no psychology. So we can talk about this differently from a psychological perspective, because there is psychology, right? So personality types were not they weren't really known, or, the personality was just something to overcome. And so what they would say is that it doesn't matter what personality type, what temperaments you have, it can all be overcome if you follow this Wheel of Samsara framework. Because the problem is not anything to do really with personality or temperament. It's to do with the whole persona itself. You see? So it's...
Yeah, you are trying to basically transform your mind.
You're trying to dissolve yourself.
Yeah, dissolve yourself, and you are trying to merge with Brahman completely.
Yeah, completely, yeah.
And to be able to do that, you need to discover the pure state of consciousness.
Yes.
Which is always there, but we just need to rediscover it.
Well, the pure state of consciousness is not dependent on personality type, temperament. Pure consciousness is within the worst person you can think of in the world. They still have pure consciousness. Why they are the worst person in the world is because they over-identified with the jiva. They may have over-identified with the personality type and used that as an excuse for their own actions in the world.
Yes, I'm this and I'm that,
Yeah.
and you identify with that certain type of person as yourself, and you just go with it.
One of the things that you and I have found with me doing this work for a long time is people often try to make excuses for their life and for the lives of other people. So they hear Eastern spirituality and they hear this framework and they say, yeah, but what about I'm like this and they're like that? And you're still trying to make an excuse. You're not applying the system to your state of being. First of all, because you don't want to dissolve the I. That's too overwhelming and dramatic. You don't have any interest in just being quiet and living a simple life, and you don't really want that. That's not your motivation. Your motivation is to live an extravagant life. So your deep motivations and your desires haven't been burnt out.
When people say, I'm like this, I'm like that, the other person is like this or that, that I would question that.
Yeah, of course.
Because when you say that, that means that the way you are is concrete.
Yeah.
You
So,
assume that where you are is concrete. It's not changeable. But for myself, when I act certain way that I didn't want it to, right? But it comes out, right? And like, why did I do that? Okay, this triggered that. Well, why did that trigger this action? I would question it
Yeah, for
because
sure.
I believe anything can change. Anybody can change,
Exactly.
right? Scientifically, our brain is fully formed around age 30 in the human life. So there are a lot of people believe that after that age, things cannot change and hard to change and rah. But I don't believe that.
Well, neuroplasticity and all of those researchers have debunked that kind of concrete mentality. And like what you said, everything is change, right? And this is, again, the argument of Eastern spirituality is that if everything is change, why is the human mind concrete? It's not.
It's not.
It's not.
That's a pretty ridiculous statement.
It's not. Well, that's why, like, how many times have we gifted the Tao Te Ching to someone, for example? It transformed their life because the Tao Te Ching, not just Taoism, but all of those other paths, they free you from the hypnosis that you're bound to this concrete version of yourself, and it gets you out of absolutes. Now, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It goes back to the single life theory, because one of the reasons that enhances this, I don't change and this and that, this is me forever, this is part of single life theory. Because you think that you're never going to change form, this is just who you are. See, that's a hypnosis from the single life theory, and most people are coming into Eastern spirituality with that hypnosis. I don't change, this is who I am forever. But everything changes. Your body is changing right now. You go outside, the nature is changing. The only thing that's not changing is your mind and your personality. That's outrageous.
Then your tendency to think that your mind is not going to change is way too strong.
Way too strong, yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah. But it's like what you said before when you're talking about absolutes. So see, when you're attracted to a single life theory, you talk in absolutes. And what is a phrase that most people are used to? Never say never. That's an Eastern way of thinking, never say never. But we stepped away from never say never and we speak in absolutes. This is the way I am. This is the way it is. Is it? Is it? It's going to change. You know, like the farmer and the sun story in Zen, right? We'll see. We'll see. The farmer is never attached to an absolute conclusion or outcome because he knows that life changes. Yeah. People are talking in these absolutes now when we're experiencing this pandemic, right? People speak in absolutes as if this is what's going to happen. The farmer's still in the background. We'll see. We'll see.
We'll see after this.
We'll see after this. We'll see what happens. And we always have to be in resonance with that mentality because you're not in absolutes. There's one absolute, and that is Brahman. There's one reality. And we're experiencing that subjectively in this localized awareness that we think is who we are.
I hear people say, from whatever happened, on the weekend, last weekend or something, that wasn't me, or that's me. What kind of statement is that? I know where they're coming from, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But for me and the place where I grew up, there is no such statement.
No.
That's to say that you already identify yourself in a certain way, and comparing that to your reality or certain experience, and that's not matching or not matching, meaning that your idea of who you are is so concrete in a very certain way. And that is to assume the single life theory, pretty much. Things not gonna change, this is me, and this is how I am, who I am, so that I like certain things and I dislike certain things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to get out of that we keep affirming ourselves to be this concrete reality. It's a bad habit, right?
It just limits yourself from being what you can be, really.
Yeah. Well, you're constantly, the identity, as we've spoken about many times, is limited. And that is the reason what you're saying, is that we're constantly believing in limitations. I am this. As soon as you say I am this, you are limiting yourself from everything else. You are solidifying yourself from everything else. And this is a constant habit that we have. This is a constant habit that the jiva has. The jiva wants to keep affirming its reality as some sort of solid entity. But in Vedanta, they use that a metaphor where we are like the jar, but we are really the space within the jar. So once you smash the jar, the space within the jar merges with the space on the outside. But the jiva is the jar, and it's trying to hold your Atman in there. It's trying to say, no, don't worry about that infinite reality and that sort of stuff. That's all nonsense. Hold on to yourself as much as you can, because if you let go, the jar might smash, you know what I mean?
There's no longer you.
There's no longer you, yeah. And nothing, exactly. Nothing makes people more afraid when there is no longer you, right? And so that's one of the big problems when people come to Eastern spirituality, because they think it's about self-improvement, self-development, enhancing their persona. But it's completely the opposite.
What I really like about the Will of Samsara philosophy is that it kind of evaporates the fear of death. You elevate your perspective on death.
Yep.
Death is something what everyone wants to avoid, right? But if you understand that philosophy, you may still be a little bit afraid, but you have a better understanding of what death means to you, right? Everything is born, and whatever is born ought to die, right?
Of course.
And again, that is a cycle of nature. And then we are that as well, so that we are going to go through the cycle as well. But because we are such consciously, intellectually evolved species, that we developed this complex psychological understanding of ourselves, so that we get to see death in a completely different way if we choose to, right?
Yeah.
And when we understand that the cycle of life from the Eastern traditions, we no longer have so much fear of death. You have much more understanding of that. You are part of something bigger than just yourself, and you are going to emerge with it when you pass on,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something very significant, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's why when we look at the funerals of the differences between Eastern and Western funerals, especially Hindu and Buddhist funerals, as opposed to, let's say, Christian funerals, there's more of a celebration in the East, because he's either experienced moksha or he's on the wheel again. Either way, it's good. It's all good. He's eventually going to reach moksha one day, maybe in the next life. Whereas it's ironic, because if we look at the Christian funerals, or we look at Western funerals in general, it's very sad. It's not that people aren't sad in the East. Of course they are, but it's not as much. But in Western funerals or Christian funerals, everyone's sad, everyone's wearing black, it's a lot of grief. And when you think about it, if you believe in heaven from a Christian perspective, shouldn't you be actually happy? Because back with God, they don't have to experience, unless you think they're an extreme sinner and they've gone to hell. I mean...
But it feels like every funeral they hold at the church feels like they treat the dead person as a sinner.
Yeah.
It's that dark and almost a bit like scary.
And I think the underlying motivation, and I know there are a lot of philosophers actually agree with this, is that they think that that's just it for that being, because they don't have a real belief in heaven. Because if you have a real belief in heaven and a real belief in Christ, you would be happy.
That-
You would obviously be sad because you miss your loved one, but in another sense, you would be extremely happy that they've merged. They're in heaven now. They're with God. They're with Christ. So, and I think that's beautiful if you understand it that way. But I don't think most people do understand it that way.
And I think we're supposed to believe in that way in Christians.
And, yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But it doesn't seem that way.
No. It seems as though that the single life theory is really just single life.
Yeah.
You're born, you die, that's it. It's game over.
And I think
it's a very atheistic way of looking at it.
Yeah. Very, and people are so fearful of the fact that that person is going through somewhere that's so unknown, right?
Yeah.
A fear of unknown.
The fear of the unknown, yeah.
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 That way of looking at it seems much stronger than looking at, like you said, merge with Christ and go to heaven or whatnot.
Because even in Christianity and other Western religions, death has been treated as some sort of terrible thing that no one ought to experience. In general, people think about death that way, right? Like you said, people are all trying to avoid death and so forth and so on. We're trying all sorts of things to live as long as we can, and we don't want to... And obviously, none of us want to experience physical pain and suffering, but we're going to. Sometime in our life, we will experience that. And I think that what the East do is, instead of avoiding it, they lean straight into it. And then that's why you have in the East, you have things like death is, for example, like when they talk about someone like, let's say Ramana Maharshi, they don't say he died. He went through Mahasamadhi. So like there's like the concept of death is not even there.
Not even there, yeah.
So Mahasamadhi, meaning the great samadhi, he went into, he merged with Brahman. But for other people, they'll say, oh yeah, he passed away, but he's on the wheel again, It's all good. But for a great being, like someone like Ramana Maharshi or someone like the Buddha, parinirvana. Same. Parinirvana, Mahasamadhi. See? Same.
That makes so much sense for me, because when we were in Bodh Gaya or in Tiruvannamalai, it's still present at those places.
Definitely.
That's why, instead of to think that being had gone, passed away, in terms of birth and death, he went into Mahasamadhi. That makes sense, because that place still has the strong presence of him and the Buddha.
Yeah.
And people still learn from being from that places,
And they still have Mahasamadhi practices. Like I've seen Mahasamadhi practices where they will dig a 4-meter pit for the master who is dying, and they'll put him down there. He sits in a lotus posture. They cover the thing over there, and that may be days before he dies, but he goes into complete darkness too. So there is all this tradition still alive. If you were to do that in the West, they'd think, these guys are crazy. They ought to be arrested. He should be in the hospital, this guy. He's going to die anyway. You might as well get him ready. They're preparing for death. And that's another thing. Like in the yogic tradition, life itself is a preparation for death. They look at it that way. So your life is a preparation for death. So what you're doing is you're trying to get rid of all of this stock, this karmic stock, as you're alive. So you merge. So you go through Mahasamadhi when you die, or parinirvana. But if you got a lot of... See, when we look at karma, or we look at the jiva, we're talking about weight, right? We're talking about heaviness. When you are identified with a persona, you feel heavy, right? Because emotions are heavy from that place. There's kind of like a weight to it. But when you get rid of it, there's a lightness about yourself. And we're talking in weight here, like a lightness, not light. And that lightness is is able to merge with Brahman or Tao or whatever you want to call it on death. But if there's a heaviness, the heaviness, it's also affected by gravity, like a metaphysical gravity that brings you back down into the womb. And then
you kind of get dropped right back in.
it's trying to float up, but it's like,
But it's
no,
too heavy.
no. I didn't get that job at Wall Street, did I? God damn it! I wanted that chick. Okay.
Still more to
do.
To do.
Yeah.
More to achieve.
More to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, that's why in Buddhism we speak about. You and I have spoke about this many times before. But when Buddhism speak about the end of will and the end of volition, that frightens a lot of people. They're talking about that because it gets rid of that heaviness of the person. Because from the Buddhist perspective, the ego is an illusion. It never existed. And so you're pretending to be like this stage character that doesn't really exist. And the stage character is very convincing because you do have personality types and you do have a genetic imprints and you do have conditioning from socialization. It's convincing. But then when you apply the Buddhist meditation and technology and you understand the path of the Buddha, then you go, man, this is all bogus. Why do I feel lighter and feel more myself when I'm not acting out of will and I'm not following my desires? Why is there a lightness to myself? You know what I mean? This is what people should ask psychologists. But they have an answer for everything. So there'll be some sort of answer. But you can't deny the reality that you feel lighter, you feel more of a connection with everything else. It's a state of consciousness that's way above the state of the jiva state of perception, the dualistic state. So that's kind of what we're doing in the Wheel of Samsara framework. Is you're trying to get rid of all of that heavy tendencies and imprints, which allows you to merge. Not just on death, you know what I mean? And this, again, goes to the differences between Jivan Mukta and Bodhisattva, right? Because Bodhisattva, as we were talking about before, you're not content until there's a liberation of all beings. So you come back life after life after life after life to, you're a very, so to speak, pious Buddha.
Yeah, in certain sects of Buddhism, they strive to be born as Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
And it's their point of view, but I don't know, I'm not so convinced.
The thing is that if the Buddha was to speak, he's talking about nirvana and liberation.
Yeah.
Again, the concept of bodhisattva came later than the early teachings of Buddhism.
Right.
We're going into Mahayana here. We're going a bit later, and so I can understand the bodhisattva principle, but even in Buddhist circles, you should always be striving for liberation. You should be striving for nirvana. The Eastern paths, especially the Indian paths, are liberation focused. So you shouldn't, again, it kind of contradicts the whole Eastern mentality if you're trying to be pious and come back and life after life, so forth and so on. That's why I made that video a few years ago about Jivan Mukta versus Bodhisattva from that perspective, because the Jivan Mukta does not want to promote or influence the world with their own agendas. Because first of all, an agenda comes from the jiva. It's when you're in the Atman or you're in your Buddha nature, there is nothing.
Yeah.
You
just act and that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
You don't have any attraction to the world anymore. You're gone beyond.
Yeah, you have no point to prove and nothing.
You may be put into the place of a teacher just because people can sense that, man, this guy is like, he has no dramas at all. He's not fooled by reality. And then you may teach in that life, as the Buddha did, as Ramana did, as these great beings did, but still they're doing their work and they're out of here. they checked out of the game, you know. And so that's what we should always be focused on. We shouldn't be focused on actually being a bodhisattva. It doesn't mean, you know, that you shouldn't have the quality of an Avalokiteshvara, like a bodhisattva, you know, being very compassionate, forgiving, kind. But that's our nature anyway. The reason why we don't resonate, or the reason why we are detached from those innate qualities of being a human, is because of socialization and conditioning and this promotion of self-interest and self-preservation. Yeah. And so we have to get out of those evolutionary needs and step into our higher nature. And so that happens when we begin to apply the tools that we were speaking about before, which have an effect on our karma, our vasanas, and our samskaras. So we should talk about that. So again, when you're not reacting out of your karma, then that's having an effect on your vasanas. You see, your habits and tendencies. But you can't just do this for 24 hours and think that things are going to change. Remember, you've had these vasanas for a lifetime. And lifetimes.
Yeah, true.
You know,
not just this
life. And so when you're doing that constantly and you're like, I'm not going to react emotionally here, even though I have the emotion, it's here, it's up in the throat, and it's about to just, I'm going to try and just swallow it, like swallowing your vomit, you know, which is an uncomfortable feeling, right? But then, and this is also an uncomfortable feeling. So then that consistent practice of vairagya and viveka has an effect on the vasana. So it's starting to transform the habits and tendencies. And then that's what gets you down into the deeper level, into the subconscious. Because the subconscious is going, man, but this is how you always react. What the hell are you doing? But it's at a subconscious level, so how do you dig into it? Well, you have to affect your actions and your actual habits and tendencies. Because those subconscious, that can't, it's beneath your awareness.
Yes.
So this is the only way to get down there. Obviously with practices of vipassana and practices like that, where you get down into the sensory Vedana level, that transforms the samskaras as well. Obviously everyone should be practicing meditation who is listening and watching this podcast, but just this course of action we were speaking about is what is the first course of action to transform your samskaras. It has to be on a relational level that you have with the world.
Yeah, like time when you're awake, basically.
Yeah, time when you're awake, yeah. So when things are happening in your life, the experiential reality, then you have to be observing yourself and seeing if you're acting out of that emotional state, and if you do, don't make this a good or bad thing, but just note it that, oh, I slipped up there, but I'll do better later. Yeah. Come back and, you know.
If you come to acknowledge that moments later, then yeah, that's still good.
You're aware of it.
Yeah, you're aware of it.
You're aware of yourself.
Yeah.
And you will get better in practicing this. There's no doubt about it. I look at myself from way back and when I was in my 20s to now, and there's almost like two different people. You know.
And so through like vipassana, that intense meditation will give you a deeper level of cleansing.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're going down with the mob.
And Vedana is
the sensory. It's the senses, basically. It's the sensorium. They'd say in Pali. Vedana is a Pali word for like the sensorium.
Right.
And so what you're doing is when you're practicing vipassana, is that you are putting your awareness on those senses in your body, and those senses are related to, you know, the impulses that fuel your vasanas and your action. So that's where the samskaras are. So they're saying that if you are observant of that, and you're not acting, you're just observing them, you're not acting out of them, then this has a deep effect on the samskaras. So you're down there with the soap and the mop, and the basement is getting pristine clean. But obviously this takes time. And you need to apply, to get down to that level, you have to apply anapanasati, so awareness of respiration or breath. And then you get down, then you can start to feel the sensations in your body at the root level in the nervous system. And that's actually, see everything we've accumulated, right, is through the nervous system. So our nervous system has all of this knowledge stored in it, and which is part of the subconscious. And so we're trying to like override the existing software, so to speak.
It almost looks like that we have samskara vasanas and karma in a psychological realm, but that's exactly the same in the bodily realm as well.
Yeah.
It's got its own samskara vasanas and karma.
And the East don't really make a distinction, do they, between...
Oh, right.
This is brain.
Right.
This is brain. Hence you practice Tai Chi, Qigong, Hatha Yoga. Obviously you do, there is a lot of focus on the mind because as Rudolf Steiner said, the human body is like an upside down tree. So we're taking nutrients, we're taking experience in through the nervous system, and that's becoming our mind.
That's storing.
That's storing. So, you turn the human upside down. It's like a tree, right? The nervous system, just like a tree, the tree takes in the nutrients through through what it experiences in the rain and the air, and, becomes a strong trunk and so forth and so on.
Yeah, like when we do sitting meditation, when you go, deep enough to sense what arises within you, for example, certain desires come up, right? Just out of nowhere, it usually does. And if you are in a deep state, then you will be able to recognize how your nervous system reacts to that desire that arises, right?
Yep.
And you are observing it. And more you get to do it, more like vivid it becomes when you're conscious as well.
Yeah.
Right. And when you do that over and over again, then you start to slowly changing your vasanas, samskaras and vasanas.
Yep.
That you see that some sort of desire comes up. For example, I want to eat that chocolate cake, just out of the blue, right? Then what happens? Then your mouth might get watery.
I'm watering right now.
Because you have memory in the past that you had that experience of eating chocolate cake, for example, right? You will you will remember a certain place where you ate the delicious chocolate cake, and because isn't it interesting? Our brain, the nervous system, remembers all these things, right? But if you get to catch it, this is what happens when this desire comes up, right?
Yeah.
You kind of giving a bit of recognition.
Yeah. There's consequences to your actions.
Well, that's it. So, job is to recognize it every time.
Every time, yeah.
Yeah, as much as possible.
Because you have to get down to that level.
Yeah.
If you're not down on that nervous system level, you're going to keep existing patterns.
Right.
Going to continue to reoccur. You're going to have 1,000 chocolate cakes in 10 years, and you're going to be the size of a house. Yeah. So the samskaras is like is a reoccurring existing pattern that just continues to unfold until you place your awareness on the nervous system. You
got to put light on that.
On that.
Yeah.
Which transforms it.
Yeah.
That's what Vairagya is doing. Vairagya is trying to get you out of, in a sense, taking in the experience. Like, it's trying to, part of the reason in Eastern spirituality they say to get over worldliness is because they don't want you to take in, this is what pratyahara is, right? Pratyahara is a withdrawal of the senses.
Right.
How do we, let's use the 8 limbs of yoga, right? How do we get into the inner limbs of yoga? Dharana, jhana, samadhi, the three higher limbs. How do we get into those states? And that's why pratyahara is the gateway. Pratyahara, you're saying,
Withdrawal.
I'm withdrawing. Because if I keep engaging in this reality, I keep accumulating samskaras, which keep messing up my pattern, my daily pattern of existing. And if you're not practicing pratyahara, then your chances of overcoming your samskaras in this is almost null and void, because you're not withdrawing from the world and overcoming worldliness. That's why I read something by Swami Nihilananda, and in Nikhilananda, let me get that right, 1,000 attempts. But I read something from him, and he's not only saying this, but he said that you can't experience samadhi in some sense if you are engaged in the world and involved in the world. You have to almost be a recluse and have distance from the world. Hence why, there's traditions such as the Theravada forest tradition. How many times have we been in the forest tradition, and the master has said, always talking about monkey mind that's going on in the city. Here, no monkey mind. And also, like all of these other great traditions, like the Taoist hermits and the Zen hermits and, the yogis and the rishis and so forth and so on. The reason why they're at a distance from society is because of this habit that you're going to accumulate experiences that are going to affect your nature, no matter what, or going to affect your samskaras, no matter how you want to think about that. So it's important to practice pratyahara, the withdrawal of the senses, and focus on again, dhrana arises after that, right? Concentration. So you can concentrate easier on your system. And the concentration then leads to jhana, meditative absorption, which then opens up the gateway to samadhi, the complete reunification with Brahman or Purusha, to use yogic terminology. So you have that process, and that's something that a lot of us ought to consider. And a lot of people don't consider this because they, again, are in the habit of trying to defend their way of life and so forth and so on. And if you're in that habit, you're not ready for Eastern spirituality, because you can't keep defending your life, When you realize that your life is not in sync with the way nature is and the way of the universe, then you have to come to terms with that, and you have to move in a different direction. We've all had to grow up and learn that. We all have to let go of ourselves to let that in to your life, you know what I mean? Let Brahman or Tao into your life. But if you're holding on to yourself, you can't. It's impossible. And that's why all of what we've been talking about, we have to do the work of the observation of the nervous system to get down into the samskaras to affect, your vasanas and your karma. And then once you've overcome that, as I mentioned earlier, once you've mopped and you've spit polished the whole samskara basement, then it's not the jiva anymore acting. You become just a limb of Shiva. You're just acting in the world, but not attached to the fruits of your action. Isn't that? You are acting authentically, acting. This is like Wu-Wei, right? Effortless living. This is this intelligent, spontaneous response to the world, where you're acting immediately and appropriately to each and every situation. You have a mind of no deliberation. A mind of deliberation comes from when you're a person and you're analysing the environment due to your own self-interest and self-preservation. How is this going to benefit me? Then you start thinking like, should I have input here? Whereas if there's no one in here, then you just act without, and it doesn't matter if people agree with what you did or not. It's done. You walk away. It's gone.
So always there is the sunyata.
Yep.
It's empty.
Empty.
No, nothing. No agenda. No opinion. You act because that's right thing to do.
Yep. That's the valley spirit, as they say in Taoism. The valley spirit, that space, that emptiness, that just acting accordingly to the appropriate and immediately to each and every situation. And that's a frightening position for most of us, because when you tell people, you just have to keep emptying out, empty, 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 empty. People, because not just in the West, but also in the East, most people are accustomed to filling up.
Yeah, yeah.
Fill. And if we fill, then we will find this happiness and contentment. But as we know, especially if we look at the cup analogy in Taoism, you have to, if you keep filling the mind cup, so to speak, it overflows, and that leads to anxiety and stress, depression, suicide, and so forth and so on. But if you're constantly emptying the cup, then what you're valuing then is the space within the cup. You're not valuing the cup itself and the contents of the cup. You're valuing the space within the cup. The valley spirit, the spirit of the valley in Taoism. People are looking at the mountains and this and that, but no one's looking at the actual
Valley.
the valley itself.
Yeah, again, without the valley, you don't see the mountains.
Exactly. So you need that. So the space, right? The emptiness. Like you said, the shunyata. And Buddhism has a big focus, obviously, on coming back to shunyata.
Yeah.
Because that's all that really exists. The filling of the cup, that's going to overflow and it's going to drain out when time comes, you know.
Yeah. And to be able to be in this state, we have to sit with the dark side of ourselves, and we often brush it off, actually, like, this is happened because of that, and just move on. There's time to be doing it, and there's no time to be doing it. And to sit with that, I think it troubles a lot of people. You know, we just can't handle it. Like, we're not resilient and patient enough. But once we purely just give a good look for a good period of time, then it kind of dissolves itself. And whatever that might be, it could be fear, desire, anything. And if you just look at it, like just like what people say to sun gaze, gazing it, and I think you gotta be able to sit with it and be able to look at it with the really honest eyes. Then we can empty it out. Yeah, and that's something a lot of us are so fearful of doing it.
Well, it's like Carl Jung's analogy, right? Like you're kind of turning light towards the darkness. The stuff that you don't want to look at, or the being you don't want to look at that you think you are, the persona, it's just, you're pointing, in the light being here, awareness. You're pointing the awareness there and you're going, okay, I'm sick of this game. I'm completely sick of it. It only causes me trouble. You know, and it's kind of sad because a lot of people, not a lot of people, but there is a majority of people that come to Eastern spirituality because they are just sick of their persona causing trouble with other people, and they know that they are a hindrance to society. So it's good that they are aware of that. But there's also a lot of people who are just not coming to Eastern spirituality just because, you know, of its own accord, you know, like of their own interest in meditation and so forth and so on. But I guess that, you know, that there's a purity in that where people understand that, oh man, I'm causing a lot of people a lot of drama around here, and I'm sick of being myself, and this looks like a solution to the problem. And then they get involved in it, like you said, but then they get a bit worried because they're like, oh man, but it exposes their attraction to themselves too, you know, because to get over yourself takes a lot of work. We're not at the psychiatrist here or the psychologist. We're at the sage. It's a bit of a different story.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like what transcendental meditation.
Transcendental meditation, yeah.
And things like that. The people use this Eastern spiritual practice and modify in certain way to benefit their social life and status and whatnot. I guess there definitely is good reason for that, and they obviously a lot of people have been benefiting from it, but that's not the end goal. And also, like when you mentioned about like hermits and the people who stay away from society and mystics in Himalayas and those people, for those people, they took this path with both hands and they fully dived into it, right? But to remain in society, it can still help you, but I think there's a limit where you can use these practices as just like a psychological therapy. You know, it's limited that how far you can go with these practices. This may come in contact with the world, with the conflict, actually, right?
Yep.
Because you don't want to be in a society in a sense, but there is no other option but to be in, right? I guess for a lot of people be in the same situation. But I don't know, you can take it to benefit your own spiritual growth as well, somehow. But there's definitely that there is a bit of a conflict and a bit of a friction there as well, that as an obstacle for our spiritual growth.
Well, it's like two opposing worlds colliding, right? Like you got your social life, your business-oriented life, your life based on money and so forth and so on. Then you've got this other life that's coming into your life that's a spiritual life, about meditation, about the dissolution of the I. So that people don't know much about that are interested in that thing, in that sort of turning spirituality into a commodity. But then you have these two worlds converging on each other, and then you have, like you said, there can be a friction with people too, because if they go deeper into the study, then they think, wow, Jesus, this is a bit overwhelming, you know what I mean? Like if they want to know more about meditation or so forth and so on.
Again, we talked about this before, that how your environment is not reflect on your psychological state.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's just a lot of us are experiencing it. And I try to see it as an opportunity to grow out of that, using the situation.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But obviously, eventually, you want to be somewhere that you want to be in.
Yeah, of course, yeah. You're not going to get a Mickey Mouse badge for sucking it up and going, look how strong I am.
I've done it.
That's still the ego.
Yeah.
You know, naturally, when you come back to more quietude, more simplicity in your life, because that's our true intrinsic nature, you're going to also yearn for that in this world, out here as well. You're not going to want to live in the city anymore, so to speak, you know what I mean? Unless you had some sort of situation in the city that was a very quiet and simple way of living. And you're not going to want the job that keeps you on the grind from 9 to 5. You're not going to yearn for that. That's why most great spiritual practitioners or great spiritual people in general have lived away from society. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
I don't think... See, this is another thing, another habit that happens with a lot of modern spiritual people. They always take things as a badge of honor. Oh, I can just stay in society now and suck it up and look at me. And it's like, no, you're still an individual, you're still egocentric. There's nothing wrong with living a simple life and moving away from life and not being associated to life. Actually, if you look at it from the Lao-Tzian perspective, Lao Tzu is saying that's actually part of the end game, is to live away from society, because first of all, you don't accumulate any more vasanas and samskaras. Your karma is completely cleansed out. The yogic tradition is like this as well, right? Hence why a yogi doesn't stay in a city or a place for longer than a few days, because they know that you start to accumulate the habits and tendencies of the community.
Yeah.
So that's why a yogi is always on the move, because life is change, life is motion, see? And so they're moving with life.
Yeah.
That's why they have minimal possessions, and they eat when they can eat and sleep when they can sleep.
Yeah, like in the book I read by Ram Dass, he had this analogy saying that there is one common thing between stagnant water and yogi. It goes rotten when it stays in one spot for too long.
It's true, isn't it?
So always in motion,
Yeah.
to purify.
And there's an insight there, isn't there? Because when you look at people who stay in, say, one location for a long time, I don't want to overgeneralize it, but let's say there's a lot of people like this, that they have a certain way about themselves that kind of reflects what Ram Dass was saying, right? And what the yogis are saying. So there's a truth to it, right?
Yeah.
And we've all experienced that. Like, we've all lived in a location for a long time where you start to accumulate the habits and tendencies of that place. And if you're a spiritual person, you just begin to notice that, and you're like, oh man, I'm becoming someone that I ought not to be.
That's a good time to make a move, eh?
It's a good time to make a move, 100%. 100%, because if you're observant, it doesn't matter what it costs to make that move or whatever.
Yeah.
Because your spiritual liberation is the highest thing of all. So when you start to notice that, you're like, man, I'm starting to act like an Australian, for example. I think it's time to roll out.
Yeah, it's time to make a move.
Time to make a move. So, but that's a really good point, because it will inhibit especially from a yogic perspective, from a Taoist perspective, it'll inhibit your spiritual practice. The only time a stagnant life is beneficial for you is if it's in nature and you're in solitude and you're in quietude and you're just really centered on your own liberation.
Yeah, like great sages did.
Yeah, of course. And are doing still.
Yeah.
You go up to the Himalayas and there's tons of them. They're just not on YouTube.
Just unseen.
Unseen.
And that's exactly what they want.
Just because you're not dressed up like a guru and on YouTube doesn't mean that they're not enlightened, or more enlightened, I should say, than people on YouTube who are dressed up as guru and actually are more about...
Yeah, those are the ones that you've got to be aware of.
Yeah, they're more about influence and so forth and so on. So, though some of them are genuine, but there are a lot that are not as genuine. But that also is a part of what we've been talking about, that kind of seclusion and simplicity that we should also seek in trying to transcend the wheel of samsara. The Buddha didn't go and set up his school in a big location. He went to Sarnath, just outside Benares, Varanasi, and it began there. And on his search to liberation, he went to Bodh Gaya, which is, there would have been no one there at the time.
Just a tree.
Just a tree beside a river, and off you go. So, we have to also consider that the way we structure our life, in a sense, is important as well. And that comes back to what we were talking about with pratyahara. See, pratyahara, you're trying to orient your life from that pratyahara perspective, the withdrawal of the senses. Obviously, a natural life in nature, if you have the opportunity to live in the Himalayas, in a cottage away from society, close to food and so forth, but centered on your own meditation practice, shanti. Guaranteed this life, mahasamadhi, So, but if you're in the city, it's hard to, or if you're in a crowded environment, it's hard to practice the withdrawal of the senses, because your senses are constantly bombarded. And though a lot of us will try to eat out vitamins and suck it up and so forth and so on, it's still affecting you somewhat at a samskaric level in the subconscious. So the way to transcend your karma and all of this Wheel of Samsara framework is to get over actually the experiential realm, because it's the experience itself which keeps the jiva alive. You know, the turiya, the fourth aspect of the four states of consciousness. So we have waking, dreaming, dreamless sleep, and turiya, the fourth. Turiya being the reality of Atman. When what is turiya? It's beyond experience. You see? See, even waking, experiential, dreaming, still experiential, even dreamless sleep, it's still experiential. There's still someone or some thing experiencing the dreamless sleep. But turiya is beyond all experience. And that's what exists when we begin to transcend that wheel of samsara, because samsara, in a sense, is trying to keep you engaged in the experiential realm, in those three states of consciousness, which keeps you then chugging along life after life, and keeps you in a cyclical pattern in your own life of experiencing your own karma in this life over and over and over again. How come I can't break this pattern? Well, you're not being observant enough of yourself. You're still attracted to the experiential realm.
The complete annihilation of the subjectivity.
Yep.
That's what it is. That's the state of turiya we should all get to.
Yeah. You're essentially going beyond everything.
Yes.
Going beyond everything that you can conceive of.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you won't exist as a person. You still function, you still take a crap, you still do all these things. You still eat, you still enjoy people's company. But your state of being is in a different state.
Yeah.
You're not attracted to the waking, the dreaming, or the dreamless sleep state of consciousness. You've come back to the turiya. You exist in the turiya. All that exists is the turiya. Actually, all that exists is Brahman. But our subjectivity and our attraction to the experiential realm keeps us creating and enhancing this jiva, which then lives life after life after life. And so we have to transcend that. And I think that's what we're doing hopefully speaking a lot about on this podcast, isn't it? So.
Just that short film that we watched yesterday, that the Indian film, that this guy tried to get his friend to the cave, pitch dark, can't see anything. And his friend is so afraid to go in because it's too dark, right? And he just keeps saying, come here, it's okay, come here. And then he went in and just can't see anything, nothing. And then, that's literally what his friend said, right? Can't see anything. This is the absolute reality. There's only darkness, nothing exists. There is no you or me, there is no image. And that's...
He said, feel it, get comfortable with it.
Yep. And that is what the turiya
That's the turiya,
yeah.
That's like in the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. The darkness within darkness, the gateway to all mystery. You see? And we're always trying to get away from that, but like in the Yoga Asana, Elevating the Consciousness, the film that we watched, feel that. Stop being afraid of that. Feel it. And then there's something else. See? You're afraid of going into the cave and into the darkness because what does that do? It eliminates not just the jiva, it eliminates the body.
Yeah.
You're not even in the body no more. That's frightening, right?
He said the body, everything is lie.
Everything's a lie.
Body is a lie.
But that's also from the Vedantic perspective, right? Everything's a lie. You're not this body, you're not this mind. Actually, none of it existed from Gaudapada's perspective. Doesn't exist. You're hypnotized into believing it exists.
Right.
There's only Brahman. You're just getting around as Brahman in this body, and you think, well, look at this suit. Look at this suit. It's good, isn't it? It's like, no, it's going to die. And this suit's only been around for like not even a fragment of the universe's existence. And you think that this is the be-all and end-all of life. Get comfortable, like you said within that film, get comfortable within the darkness, the eternal abode, the reality. Because that's all that really is there, right?
Yeah.
So,
Really good.
really good, yeah.
Yeah.
Think we covered a lot?
Yeah, I think,
yeah.
yeah, pretty much.
There's a lot to speak about when we talk about samsara, also reincarnation. But I think we covered a lot.
Yeah.
And again, people have to look at what we're talking about from the many lives perspective and not from a single life perspective.
Yep.
Because if you're trying to, this is again a problem with Westerners, especially, is they always looking at Eastern spirituality from a Christian indoctrination. Even though they may think they're atheist or so forth and so on, they are subtly indoctrinated with Christian perspectives of single life theory, of, absoluteness, as you were speaking about.
Yeah.
So you have to come to this and look at it from the mentality of an Easterner.
Yes.
Many lives theory. There's no absolutes. There's only one absolute, which is Brahman, and it's everything. But there's no absolutes as in yourself, your jiva.
Yeah.
You might think you're this way, that way, this way, this way. You're not. It can all be transcended.
Yeah.
All right. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we'll see you guys next week.